it's late, but we just got 3 new cadavers, and no one else can make it in right now. I was hoping you could come in and take care of them.
Look at me! Look at this pitiful flesh I am service to. But this body is no longer mine.
Hey everyone, it's Soul here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's spooky month, and that means we have to discuss some spooky games. Now, instead of playing through something like Outlast, which I don't know if I'll ever have the nerve to play myself, instead I wanted to talk about a game that came out last year, and while it is still definitely terrifying, it actually has a really nicely done story woven within all of the horror. Today we will be discussing the Mortuary Assistant. Just a quick sidebar, they did come out with a Halloween update recently, as well as a new ending to the game back in July this year. So if you haven't replayed the game in a while, I would highly recommend you do so, because that 6th ending has a lot to unfold within it. Now, this game is executed so well, with the 6 official different endings and an unofficial 7th one as well. The detail in the writing and the gradual release of information related to Rebecca, our main character, and about her boss Raymond Delver and his knowledge of demons and possessions, this game is just so well balanced and so masterfully done. So let's just take a moment to look at everything that the Mortuary Assistant did good that helped set it apart and set it above a lot of other horror games. Real quick before we do though, I will be live streaming this upcoming Wednesday for the first time ever at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on my YouTube to play some Five Nights at Freddy's, just to have some fun, hang out with you guys, and just get excited for the release of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, which comes out next weekend. I hope to see you guys all there. Now, as always, please remember to hit that like button, click subscribe to see more videos from me, and leave a comment down below. Here is your one and only warning that this video contains spoilers. Alright, grab your scalpels and your trusty demon mark, and let's get toasty. The Mortuary Assistant is a game that came out with its full release back in August 2022. The game is developed by Darkstone Digital and published under Dread XP, and the game itself is developed by one guy by the name of Brian Clarke. He is an incredible solo game dev who is responsible for the Mortuary Assistant. Now, before I go any further, I just have to give a massive round of applause to Brian, because despite any of the minor technical issues that some players have had since the release of the game, this game, as I've already said and probably will say a bunch more times in this video, it's insanely impressive for so many reasons, and Brian just did a fantastic job with this game. So what actually is the Mortuary Assistant? Well, we follow our main character, Rebecca, as she heads over to her job as an assistant at the mortuary. After experiencing some strange hallucinations and hearing some voices in the distance, Rebecca gets sent home by her boss, Raymond Delver. While worrying that she may have done something wrong and could be at risk of not getting this job, she ends up getting a call later in the evening to go and help with 3 new bodies. Eager to prove herself, she goes in there expecting to do her job, only to be locked in the building by Raymond, who says that a demon has started attaching itself to her, and that the only way to survive is for her to find which body in the morgue it is currently possessing and to spell out its name on a demon tablet and destroy it in the furnace. Players get to go through all kinds of paranormal terrors and jump scares as the demons become more and more threatening and terrifying with each body that is successfully embalmed. Players will go through and experience everything from mild tapping and rasping sounds on doors and windows to seeing figures move in the shadows, and even full-on visions and contorting bodies in the mortuary. With every playthrough that the players go through, things also seem to get more and more intense, as more flashbacks and mind games are being played on Rebecca as the demon brings up her traumatic past with the death of her father and her mother, as well as her past struggling with addiction. Throughout the game, players can also uncover all of the secrets about Mr. Delver and how he is able to trap and defeat all of these demons which is revealed to be by keeping a possessed woman, a woman named Valerie, locked away in a coffin in the basement and using her blood as a sort of antidote and cure. Now, right off the bat, this game does an outstanding job with all of the randomly generated scares that occur through the game. Randomly generated is probably not the correct terminology, but I sadly don't know too much about how these sort of scare systems are generated, but I will try my best to explain what I have found. Now, there are some great interviews with the creator Brian, in which he explains this immensely complex horror system and algorithm that he has sort of created in order to trigger the horror events in this game. And while the scares definitely feel randomly generated, the reality is that they are not. In his interviews, Brian has stated that the system has a sort of list of requirements in order to actually trigger a certain scare or to garner a diversion to a particular story event. Now, the requirements are based around what the players have done in the game, what they may have picked up, and if my understanding is also correct, it also has to do with their history and experiences in the previous playthroughs. Now, the game also uses the player's current location in the mortuary to trigger certain scares and events as well. This sort of allows the game to be able to trigger and adapt an event immediately right when the player has reached these certain requirements. And again, while my explanation isn't the best, I do find this really fascinating, and if you are someone who is interested in game development, I would strongly recommend that you go and watch and listen to some of these interviews, because with Brian being a solo developer, there is a lot that you can learn, and he is very open about his thought process and how this system works. But in general, the idea of a system that is sort of remembering your moves and adapting all of the time to your history of the playthroughs is something that is really fascinating, and it's most certainly very effective. These scares tend to feel like they grow from less intense to a higher level of intensity throughout the evening in the mortuary, as well as throughout the multitude of playthroughs. But aside from how the complex system works, the sheer amount of different types of jump scares and horror events that this system has, it's insanely impressive. Now, of course, if you play the game long enough, perhaps by the 5th or 6th playthrough, some things will start to become just a smidge repetitive. If I remember correctly, Brian had stated that there are only 12 story events, so yes, by the time you get to that 6th playthrough, these story events will most likely have begun repeating. However, with the adapting system, there will always be something ever so slightly new to how you get to those story events, or how some of those scares and animations play out. While a horror game with all of these different types of jump scares and horror events is definitely something that will keep bringing people back to play the game, the idea of there being more than one different ending is highly intriguing as well. Now, it's already quite clear on my channel that my favorite games are the butterfly effect horror games, so in general, whenever there is a story that has multiple different endings, it always tends to pique my interest and make me more inclined to play the game. But wait, because then there is even more. So you take the idea of there being more than one ending combined with this insanely complex horror system, it's already genius in and of itself, but then we add in the complex lore of Raymond and the beautifully spread out tragic story of Rebecca and her past. Now, as already stated, Brian said there are 12 story-driven events, and they are actually generated and experienced in groups of 3, meaning there would be no more than 3 story events in each playthrough. And honestly, this sort of balance and spread out nature of the story, it's honestly just the cherry on top, and it's absolute perfection. I have to be honest, I might be a little biased simply because I love stories that are broken up in a sort of delirious feeling. Whether it's told through flashbacks and abstract, nonlinear methods such as this, these sort of broken up, confusing storytelling ways are some of my favorite because I just love that feeling of uncertainty that comes with them. One can't help but question, is what Rebecca's seeing real or is it fake? What part of it happened? Which part of it didn't? Is it all just a trick? And it becomes a bit of a mystery as the players are left to piece together clues of the real story on their own. With most of the endings, all except for the closure ending, we also don't get any answers to these parts of the story, so you can potentially go through multiple playthroughs without getting a closure ending, and still not fully knowing the context and full story of Rebecca's past. Now, as stated earlier, there are 6 official endings, with that 6th one having been added earlier this past year. There is also a sort of unofficial ending as well, in which you run out of time, and since you are getting possessed, you will be chained up in the basement by Raymond and locked away in a coffin. The first official ending in the game, however, is when Rebecca survives for the first night and talks to Raymond the next morning, who then asks her to come on and work for him full-time in the night shift, as he reveals that while she is safe for now, the demons will continue to come after her, and once they get a taste, they will always come back. The second official ending is if Rebecca survives for a second night. The third ending is when Rebecca burns the wrong body and doesn't successfully destroy the demon. This will lead her to become possessed and kill Raymond the next morning. The fourth official ending, also known as the basement ending, is if Rebecca discovers the woman, Valerie, who is locked away in the basement in the coffin. If Rebecca survives and destroys the correct body, she will then confront Raymond about the woman in the basement the next morning. The fifth ending is the closure ending, in which we will discuss that a little bit more. And then the sixth ending, well, if you haven't checked it out, you definitely should, because there is so much to unpack and discover. And don't you worry, because we will definitely be getting around to discussing that a little bit later on. Now, from my observation, most people tend to get possessed within their first playthrough. The gameplay itself can be just a smidge challenging to get used to, causing many people to pick the wrong body or the wrong symbol on the demon mark, leading to the ending in which they get possessed and kill Raymond. So naturally, people will want to replay the game in order to be successful and live. But between the first and second playthroughs, some information begins to come to light about Rebecca's past through those groups of 3 story events, which is insanely effective at pulling players in for more and more playthroughs. Of course, achieving the different endings is the ultimate goal, but having new information come to light about Rebecca, I find, is crucial in keeping people intrigued and keeping the entire game feeling new for as long as possible. Things like the delirious scene of Rebecca wandering through the mental hospital and leading to a door with her hanging out there is one example that definitely intrigued and confused players. Another clip, we can see her in a rundown apartment that was hers, or perhaps just a place she frequented when she was deep in her addiction. Notes found in some of these scenes and these spaces, or perhaps the dialogue through telephone calls, they start to imply that her father's death is weighing heavily on Rebecca's mind. And whether it's through the letter mentioning her father's 5-year sobriety chip, or if it's her friends saying that Rebecca's father is being an ass and looking for her, we start to get the hint that something tragic and massive happened to her father. And then eventually, players will get a flashback to the night that Rebecca's father had died. He had been out looking for Rebecca, who was deep in her addiction, before he found her, but then sadly slipped on rocks and died right in front of her. It is a very emotional story, and when players get the closure ending that I mentioned earlier, Rebecca is visited by her father's spirit, and we learn how all of this time, Rebecca has held on to the guilt and the remorse that she feels about her father's death, blaming herself for her father's death since he was out looking for her. As Rebecca speaks and expresses her guilt to her father's spirit, he reminds her that it was not her fault that he had died, and that she should have never been exposed to the sort of addictions that her mother had also apparently faced throughout her childhood and upbringing. Stating that he will always be with her, he leaves Rebecca with a loving hug and a statement of how he is so proud for how she is helping to defeat and destroy the demons and save innocent souls. This heartbreaking resolution helps reveal to us as players that Rebecca has been struggling immensely with not only the guilt and feeling that she is responsible for her father's death, but also the idea that she is struggling with survivor's guilt. Now, I don't know how many of you have friends or family, or perhaps you yourself have experienced addiction, but survivor's guilt is something that is sadly very prominent in surviving and recovering addicts. And I think oftentimes it can be overshadowed, so I really respect the creator Brian once more for bringing this sort of message and story to light. Now, since it wasn't truly mentioned in any of the interviews that I watched, I don't know how this part of the story came about, but I would be very interested in how he came up with this idea because it is so emotionally written and it's really effective at adding another layer of complexity to this already masterfully done horror story. Like I said earlier, it really is the cherry on top of this amazing game. And while the story of Rebecca is so emotionally fantastic, the addition of the 6th ending this past summer introduced a whole other layer of lore and depth to the character of Raymond Delver. In this new ending, Rebecca goes through the night as normal before making her way down to the basement, determined to help free the girl named Valerie from the coffin. Following the instructions from Valerie, Rebecca takes off the mark from the coffin and burns it with the possessed body in the morgue before freeing Valerie from her coffin. But sadly, that is no longer Valerie. The demon still being attached to the body will end up attacking Rebecca before Raymond jumps in and saves Rebecca by fighting the demon with hand and fist and some sort of demon mark that has been tattooed onto his chest. Having successfully fought off the demon, Rebecca leaves the mortuary terrified and disappointed and frustrated that Raymond won't tell her all that he knows about how to fight and defeat these demons. Raymond is then seen walking into a secret hidden room where he appears to have his mother tied up as she is possessed. As the demon mocks him over his loss of Valerie, who has been the person supplying him with the possessed blood needed for the treatment and destruction of the demons in the possessed bodies in the mortuary, Raymond appears calm and collected as he apparently cuts off a piece of his mother's body and re-tattoos part of his sigil that disappeared on his chest during the fight. It is very clear in this ending that Raymond has faced these demons for an insanely long time, with him just accepting that there is no end in sight. The addition of Raymond fighting the demon in this new ending shows the lore and the demon system is still being expanded upon and updated, and while it's not yet clear if there will be a major update with a lot more expansion on Raymond's past, or if there will be a DLC or perhaps a prequel type of game, but it's made very clear that we can expect a lot more demon lore to be coming to light moving forward, as it definitely seems to be on the front of Brian's mind in developing this story and game more. Now, of course, with any game, there are bound to be some sort of issues and critiques. As I've already said, there are some minor technical issues and bugs that have been patched out and worked on since the release of the game. The only true critique outside of any sort of technical issues that I've come across is the idea of the actual embalming process being the same. Now, it is without a doubt impressive how Brian took the real-life mortician embalming process and turned it into a video game in very simplistic terms. That is definitely outstanding, as many people have come forward and said that this is very similar and scarily similar to how they actually embalm a body. It is, again, insanely impressive that he has done this. However, some people find that it becomes a bit too repetitive when you keep replaying the game 4, 5, 6, even maybe 7 times in order to get all of the endings. And I have to be honest, I do kind of agree. I definitely think that switching up 1 or 2 of the embalming process steps would definitely help keep players on their toes. However, Brian did state in his interviews that his main focus is the horror elements and the story, rather than it being a sort of simulation job type of game. So while I do think it would be beneficial to change maybe just 1 or 2 steps, I understand and respect the idea that Brian does not wish to do that. As a whole, though, I really enjoyed this game, and while I was definitely terrified, I think that the writing and the execution of this is fantastic. Everything from the mix of the stories, Raymond's past, Rebecca's history, and the lore of the demons on top of the events of Rebecca facing every single night, it's all so well balanced, and with the genius horror event system that Brian has created, there is always new scares to be had when playing and replaying this game. I would absolutely love to hear what you guys think about this game. Before I go, though, I just want to say, once again, I will be going live on YouTube this Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in order to play Five Nights at Freddy's, so I hope to see you all then. If you guys like my discussion, please remember to hit that like button down below and leave your thoughts in the comments section. While you're down there, click subscribe to see more videos from me. And turn on notifications if you want to be notified whenever I post a new video. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you future souls next time. Bye, guys!